Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for our show and tell. This is the second show and tell for the Barnsley Metropolitan Borough Council Income Management Discovery. Thank you very much for those people who were here last time as well. This is our lovely team. So there are 3 members of Barnsley Metropolitan Borough Council working with us and 3 members of DXW on the main part of the team. We also have some other members of the team helping us. So Saul is going to be helping us quite a bit as we move forward, and plus some other members of the team as we move into the 3rd sprint, where we've got quite a lot to do. So as I said, this is our second show and tell for the Barnsley BMBC, I'm going to just say BMBC, Income Management System Discovery. The last one, we reported some research that we've done. We've done quite a lot since then, so there's going to be some really great things to talk to you about later on. Here is our roadmap. It's a bit of a sketch of the things that we've got going on. As you can see in the 3rd bit down where we've got research, it took us a little while to get people to start talking to us, and but we've seen quite a lot of local authorities. We've got some more scheduled into sprint 3. Really, we think that we've got some other things to work on, which we'll talk about later on. So we've got quite a bit to do in that 3rd sprint. We'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. So we've been continuing with the research activities. We've been doing interviews, workshops, and we've got an online survey. And Marianne's going to talk about all those things later on. So our sprint goal for this sprint was to form some conclusions about all the user needs that we'd heard, and plan for the things that we need to learn about the business goals and technical constraints. So those are the areas that we've done least work on so far. And so that's going to be the focus of our next sprint. We've got some risky assumptions, which we've detailed here. Broadly, we just need to make sure that we understand what the other council's focus is. We're de-risking the project to make sure that we identify what our assumptions are and what will happen if these things aren't true. So we've collected data from users in interviews and in workshops. We can keep looking for answers for some of this, but some of this will be later phases. So we've got some research questions. As I said, so I'm going to hand over to Marianne, who's going to talk to you about those.
Thank you. Yeah, so a quick recap if you weren't part of our first show and tell, you haven't caught up on it. Our main research questions, there's 2 main ones. The first one being about what appetite is there for the Barnsley income management system, and that links to how similar other local authorities are in how they handle their income management, if there are any differences to how Barnsley do it, any barriers there might be to adopting Barnsley income management system, any concerns, and what needs to be added or changed. And the second main question is how might a user-centred solution designed by councils for councils be shared, delivered and maintained over time. And so that's where some of the desk research into technical constraints comes in. Also looking at the attitudes towards using something from another local authority and what that might mean, understanding how it might be delivered, governed and managed, and developing a bit of a benefits case as part of this as well. So if you go to the next slide. So far we've completed 4 research sessions. That's a mixture of interviews and workshops. So I think we've seen about 6 councils in all at the moment. Yet as 2 days ago, we went down to Huntingdonshire and we had 3 councils in that session, which was really good. And we have 3 sessions set up for the next sprint. So down in Sherwell and South Northamptonshire with Sheffield, and something with the gov.uk pay team and possibly with Hackney Council as well. So we've got a little screenshot, if you go to the next screen. A screenshot of who has been involved so far. So the yellow is all the face-to-face activities, and blue is where respondents for the online survey have come from. Sometimes people who we've spoken to face-to-face have also done the survey, so sometimes their little tags are covered up by a different colour. And there are a couple of people on the survey who didn't actually give us their location, so we can't guess where they are. I could put a little blob in the sea somewhere. So then if you go to the next page, the little red markers indicate where we have interviews planned for the new year. So you can see it's quite a nice spread around the country, which is good. Different types of councils getting involved as well, so not just metropolitan. And that's really good to get those different perspectives too. And then this is just a picture showing that we actually went to speak to some real people. So this is from a couple of the workshops we've done with the various activities we had planned. So We talked a bit about their current income management system, their likes and dislikes. We got them to map out their users on a little radar map based on who are the core users and who are sort of light users, who are loosely connected or stakeholders for it. We did a switching forces exercise with them, and we went through a whole process trying to understand their income management as well. So all of these things have fed into our analysis. I think I'm about to hand over to Richard, who's going to take us through a lot of that.
Thank you very much. So yeah, we found some fantastic things so far. First one is that poor experience is not always enough to trigger change in councils. We had this ourselves. We only changed because we kind of hit an impasse and we had to do something, but not a lot of councils are in that position. So although they might be experiencing the same sort of difficulties we did that weren't quite the impasse, high costs, long contracts, expensive upgrades, that in itself is not necessarily enough to force a move, because if they were to move, the marketplace is quite small. There's not necessarily a solution that will fix all of the problems they're currently experiencing, and so it's not, there's not enough there to justify a jump. And a change like this with an income management system is quite a tricky one. There's a lot of different stakeholders that need to be satisfied, from sort of audit through to people taking cash and checks and payments, to people who run the income management system themselves in finance departments. So it's quite a big thing, and a lot has to happen to force a change. What we're finding instead is councils will put up with the poor experiences. They'll create workarounds, time-consuming manual workarounds to get through things. Ultimately, they end up distrusting their own data because they have to double check that the systems are doing what they think they're doing and the workarounds are working in the way they should, which all just adds up to a lot of sort of duplication of effort that could be freed up if only they could find a solution. So yeah, the next slide along, we've found that most participants have experience of shared services, but it's not clear what it would mean to move to a local government product that's built by local government for local government. So councils are looking for a lot of assurances that if they do invest in a local gov income management system this year, it won't have disappeared next year. So they basically want assurances that resource will be committed to supporting the product in the long term, that it'll continue to be developed and it won't just stagnate. Basically, no one wants to move to a system this year and then have to repeat the process again next year, because as I say, it's a big, heavy-duty task to do. But they're also looking for assurances around being able to make changes as well. So a lot of the incumbent systems are sort of legacy systems. They're quite difficult to customize. It often means going back to suppliers for expensive work being done. So they'd like some assurances around, if they wanted to add a new fund type, or they wanted to add a new method of payment, or change some suspense rules so that money coming in can be automatically allocated rather than falling into an unknown pot, that they can configure those things themselves through a kind of self-service mechanism, and they're not relying on contact with suppliers. And the same goes for integrations as well. If they want access to their data, How do they get it? How do they handle it? On the next slide, big concern from everybody, back one, there we go, is what support's going to be available. So support levels have been a main dislike with most of the people we've spoken to, with most councils noticing a degradation in the level of service they've had in recent years. The general feeling is that the incumbent systems they have aren't necessarily developed anymore. They do the job that they were designed to do back when they were designed. For example, one council told us that they still don't have mobile-friendly screens for taking payments on their website. I think responsive design for mobiles came out in like 2009-10. So 10 years on, they still don't have mobile designs. How, that's to get those, then they have to get a big sort of expensive change put in. So there's a lot of sort of distrust in that. So they're looking for sort of confirmation that the SLAs will be acceptable if they do need support, that things like mobile screens are being developed and we're going to keep up with the latest sort of trends, and that basically there'll be somebody there if something should go wrong. So hosted services, yeah, most councils have said we'd like to go hosted. Ultimately, that means that the systems are updated for them, not by them. They don't have to put an investment resource in doing that. lower upfront costs for getting started. They don't have to build a big sort of infrastructure and all the servers and hardware necessary to get one of those up and running. There's less risk overall, but of course, as with all sort of hosted services, they want some assurances around the security concerns. If data is going to be hosted, where will it be hosted? How safe is it? How do they access it? Basically, they still want to have some control, but not all the control they get if they were running it on premise. Too many risks with that. And then the next one surprised me, that not everyone knows what GovPay is. And so a lot of councils, because they don't know what it is, they don't recognise the value that it can offer. And so when we talk about that, when I talked about that change at the beginning, they're not looking to sort of release themselves from what are potentially more expensive incumbent suppliers to look at something like gov.uk Pay, because they just don't know it's there, or they don't know what it can give them and what value they can take from it. So perhaps we need to do something around that, especially if we're looking to integrate with GovPay and provide a holistic sort of take payment, manage income solution across the piece. Okay, I think that's me.
What we have identified for many users that they're not already covering by existing IMS system. At the moment, we don't have a screen for the configuring import suspense rules, but this is in our backlog to build so users don't have to rely on IT to update them. Also, the interface module doesn't have a user front end to allow users to configure their own. All interfaces are currently written by IT. So again, this is on our backlog to develop to make it easier for users to control the system themselves. People have told us that both of these are important to them. At Barnsley, we do take some cash payments, and the system can process these, and these go to general ledgers in our financial system. But some years ago, we decided to close our face-to-face counters where citizens could pay for the council tax and the rent payments. So we will need to look into interfacing with chip and pin devices if some councils do require the citizens still to pay at face-to-face the council tax.
Thank you very much, Richard and Zoe. So there we go. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been using this switching forces framework, which Marianne mentioned, to analyse some of the things that that we've learned from people. Stop trying to read all the stickies. They're very, very small. That's not the point. So what we've got is these 4 areas. So what we find is that it's a really good way of finding out what things the service has. What if we look first of all at the push, what reasons internally might push the councils towards using this service, the things that Barnsley already do, and the benefits of the service, which will pull them towards using it. The anxieties are the risks that they can see around, or the things that they think about the service. So how is it going to be maintained? How is support going to be handled? That kind of thing. And then the inertia is more the risks associated with the ways that the councils are already working, behaviours and habits and that kind of thing. So the anxieties are much more easy for us to understand and do something about. The inertia is less so. So we're just trying to work out how to deal with some of those issues. But it's a really good way of viewing all of those things. So a little bit more about the survey from Marianne.
Yeah, so we've had this survey running since probably the 1st or 2nd week that this project started, and we plan to keep it running into the new year, probably to the end of the 2nd week of January. We've had 15 completes so far, so there's a sudden spike this week, which is quite encouraging, but we would still like to get more people to go through this, just so we have more data to rely on. So yeah, 15 so far from 13 different councils. 2 of those people didn't answer that question, so we don't know exactly where they're from. But this is nice, so we're getting a nice spread. I've got, if you go to the next slide, you can see again, those are the blue dots of where everyone's coming from, all the way from Scotland down to right at the other end of the country, so that's really good. If you go to our next slide, the breakdown of the people we've had going through this. We've had a lot of people from IT roles. We've had 3 from finance, 3 from sort of digital or transformation roles, and then 2 from more business support roles like project management. And there's quite an even spread to the experience they have with an income management system. So whether they rely on it, whether they support it, or whether they are connected to it in some way but don't rely on it. And in terms of who they're using currently, most people reference Capita or Civica, or they might have several different systems they're using for their income management. So that gives us an idea of where they're coming from. Go to the next slide. So we've got a little bit of a mismatch from the survey to what we've been hearing in terms of what they're clicking in the options. So when we ask them what is most important about your supplier, the thing that gets the most votes, although only marginally, is about getting the, can't even read it from here, the best feature set for what you need. So I think what we've been hearing in the interviews and workshops, it goes without saying that they're not going to start using a new service if it doesn't give them the features that they need to do their job. But what we've heard more in qualitative stuff is that costs really factor in, the service levels really factor in. So there's slight differences there. But then when you look at some of the comments that come along with the survey results, you start to see some of that come out a bit more. So it's really good that we do have a lot of free text in this survey. So we got a survey respondent saying, it lets us do what we need to do within the confines of what they're able to provide. It isn't very flexible. Costs involved getting anything corrected are very high. That's stuff that we've been hearing with our workshops and interviews. Expensive to maintain and upgrade. Standard of support can vary depending on which support staff picks up the call. We did actually hear the exact same thing in one of our workshops the other day as well, particularly around support. If you get someone new, they don't know what they're doing, they don't even understand what you do as a role and how you use the system, so they tend to try and find that particular person who they know have been around there for a long time, and because they know they'll actually solve the problem for them. So we're seeing some differences and some things echoing. The next bit of data here is around the likelihood that they might change their supplier in the future. There's a bit of a 50-50 split, so up to the orange box there is people who probably aren't going to change, and then above that, people who might change. I need to look a bit deeper into the data to really understand what's driving this. So it could be because they've recently entered a new contract and therefore they don't see any way of getting out of it, or they might just have a little appetite for change, but I don't know at this point. But if you go to the next slide, you can see there's a bit of a link to their satisfaction levels. So we have an almost 50-50 split again in terms of satisfaction levels. So that might have something to do with it. If they're fairly satisfied with their system, why would they change? But despite all of that, the support for Barnsley is generally really high. So everyone who's answered this question, there have been some people who skipped it, but everyone who did answer it have answered 6 and above, which is quite positive. And quite a few people answering 10 out of 10, so being very supportive for what Barnsley is trying to do. So that shows a little bit of the appetite for the people going through the survey. And then we have a lot of questions in this survey, so I've only picked out a few of them, but one of the ones we wanted to find out is what third-party services need to be integrated with the Barnsley income management system. So we have talked about gov.uk Pay already. A couple of the other ones on here are WorldPay, SmartPay, and I think Stripe on here. WorldPay is actually coming out as one of the must-haves, and a lot of people would like the gov.uk Pay, but then we're getting some people selecting that they don't need it, or they maybe don't know what certain things are as well. But that's giving us a slight indication about what we need to be considering in terms of development. And that's what we have from the survey. So we'll have more from that in the next sprint when I've had a bit longer to go through everything.
Thanks, Marianne. So in terms of what's next, when I showed you the roadmap, you could see that there were quite a few lovely different coloured blobs of things that activities that we need to do. So one of those things is desk research. So we're going to be completing some desk research. We've got someone actually working between Christmas and New Year. The rest of us are off on our holidays, but we've got one person who's going to carry on working, which is excellent. We want to look into the different aspects, which I'll show you in a second. And one of those main concerns, which is around the support service, we want to look into that and start some thinking about what would be required to roll out the IMS. But as we've said, some of the questions that we have in mind are more for later phases, but we need to answer them as part of the, or have some idea and be reporting some things. And here you can see we've been focused mainly on user needs, the desirability of the service, and we've got quite a long way with that. We need to do a little bit more on the business goals, so Richard's going to be leading on that, and we've got a meeting planned with senior stakeholders in Barnsley in January. And then James is going to be looking mainly at the technical constraints, business models and governance models of working in the various ways that we've been discussing with users. And so that's the focus for the next and final sprint. Oh, we've got some arrows, sorry about that. Our next show and tell will be on the 20th of January, which is ages away. It's next year. But by then we hope to be able to talk to you about the changes that we've made, and then we're going to do a final show and tell where we're going to invite all of the parties who've been involved on the 28th of January. And we hope that some of them are going to be there in person, although I expect quite a few of them will be dialing in remotely. So that's the end of our show and tell today. Has anybody got any questions? Excellent. Okay. If anybody who watches this later has any questions, then please get in contact with us. We'll put some contact details on the slides so that you can find us. And we look forward to hearing from you, and have a lovely Christmas and New Year. Thank you very much.